Professor Dr. Shivalingaswamy HK is currently the chairman of Department of Studies and Research in English, Tumkuruniversity, Tumkur. Professor Swamy was conferred the PhD degree by Bangalore University for his work on explorations of existentialist philosophy in European and non-European fiction in the year 2009. He has participated in conferences, workshops, and refresher courses as a resource person. Swamy sir has published in many ranges. His publications range from literatures in English to literatures in Kannada. Currently, Professor Swamy has been contributing articles on current affairs to Kannada dailies like Prajavani, Kannada Prabha, and Praja Pragati. He has produced 3 PhD scholars. The ongoing research work under his guidance has been on caste, religion, nationalism, gender, etc. I extend my heartfelt thanks to sir for accepting our invitation. I welcome Swamy sir to this national webinar. I extend my thanks to Swamy sir on behalf of organizers and all the participants. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Professor Shivapuji Koti, for a nice introduction. Over to Dr. Swamy. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So you must have definitely had a kind of a treat after listening to those 2 speakers, because one of them happens to be my teacher, Professor Vaishali, and she must have definitely enriched your knowledge about the synthesis that has to happen between literature and language. And Dr. Tamaya, in fact, has asked me to deliver a short talk on language skills. So I have actually taken certain amount of liberty in interpreting this language skills to an extent where I would want to speak a few things about language of any kind. And in the meanwhile, I'm not going to concentrate only on English language here, because I'm actually trying to concentrate more upon languaging as a very important cultural activity that we are supposed to impart to our students. So let's begin with the first point. Whenever we have a language class, when we are addressing our students, we normally begin with a short definition. And that definition invariably is language is a means of communication. Understand this, when we simply define it as just a means of communication, it not only gives a lot of scope to students to just take liberty with the language, in the meanwhile, it may also lead to the abuse of language. So what I would want to say in the beginning here is, language, when we start teaching it to our students, even if it is Kannada, which is of course the mother tongue of the students of Karnataka, we cannot simply tell them that it is just a language meant for some communication. Language, of course, is a very powerful tool, which is an identity marker for us. And the way we use the language speaks about us. And when we are there on the stage, imparting to students certain language skills, we are responsible to make students not only learn certain basics of language, we have to somehow make sure that the students are empowered enough to be in a position where they can not only communicate, but they should also be in a position to get their intended meanings. So when we use language in the classroom, it has to be not only a tool for communication, but it needs to be as profound as possible, so that students gather from us at the outset and then replicate our language outside. So as teachers, when we teach language to students, we need to do a lot of introspection and make sure that we teach the same language to ourselves first. It's a kind of a claim that we make on the stage that we are language experts. Having made such huge claim in the face of our students, it is up to us to enrich our students' knowledge of language to an extent of making them communicate their language to get intended meanings. And what I mean by intended meaning here is, when a student says something, be it in Kannada or be it in English, his communication has to be complete. And such kind of communication can happen only when the person on the stage does it perfectly well. Because when we were in MA, we did not really have anybody doing any bit of teaching in bilingual mode. We had, of course, something called principles of teaching, which had one small component on bilingual teaching, but none of the teachers, in fact, resorted to Kannada for the convenience of those who had come from rural areas. Instead, it was all in English, and we, in fact, had to grapple with the language, and we were exposed to a maze of difficult vocabulary, and being inside the classroom, in fact, would be a kind of a hellish experience for some of us, and it took us almost more than 3 months to get used to classrooms. And I, in fact, found it extremely difficult to sit in some classes because their language, in fact, was a kind of a hard nut for me to crack. But in the meanwhile, I was seated with some girls who had come from premier colleges of Bangalore, who actually were very much at home inside the classrooms, and it used to be a kind of an interaction only with those girls and the teachers. It was a very interesting and an irritating, alienated experience for me personally. But there was no concession from the side of the teachers. And once it was inevitable for me to understand and also learn English, meaning like them, it's not that I didn't know English, but my English, in fact, was not sufficient enough for the kind of atmosphere to which I was exposed. So I had to somehow groom myself with a lot of difficulties. And we have to, of course, as teachers, do the same here without resorting to too much Kannada inside the classroom. Of course, bilingual teaching has to be there, but that should not be a concession for all of us to use only Kannada for our convenience, because English classes have been diluted precisely because of too much Kannada teaching. And if we can do some introspection and do a little bit of serious teaching to help students learn the language, where they will arrive at some amount of expertise in English language or Kannada language to get intended meanings from their language. And this is exactly what I want to first put forward here in the beginning of this talk. Another thing is, when we do this language education, it is a very serious task that we have undertaken, because language education, in fact, has to help our students to understand their social surroundings basically. Because language, like we all know, is a major carrier of huge amount of meanings. Language carries loads of meanings. And unless we sensitize our students to certain nuances of language with a lot of seriousness, they'll never be able to locate some meanings which are implicit in the language in their surroundings. What I mean here is, yesterday, a friend of mine was giving a talk on Facebook. It was live. I was actually surfing through Facebook and I stumbled upon it. So I just listened to him for a while because he happened to be my senior also in primary school. He was giving a talk on successful marriages. I didn't have any problem with mine here, but just that I felt slightly attracted to the topic. He was narrating an interesting anecdote of Sita Devi of Ramayana. He said Sita, in fact, was the shadow of her husband. And this was the advice that he was giving to his listeners to work out their marriages by being shadows to their husbands. ನಿಮ್ಮ ಗಂಡಂದಿರ ನೆರಳಿನಂತೆ ನೀವು ಇರಬೇಕು is what he said. So this is where things become extremely interesting for us to do some language teaching. So there are some keywords in the sentence used by this speaker. Supposing we do some serious analysis of this sentence, we will be pretty awestruck by the metaphor that he has used. That is neralu, shadow. And we got to compliment the speaker here because he put certain thing across to the listeners in a very interesting manner. But the meaning that he's trying to produce is not really a welcome one. And the women would of course become misled here because it's a very patriarchal talk. And because I was a little compelled to give some feedback, I just told him this. Your talk was pretty okay, but make a slight change. Sita being a shadow to Sri Rama, if it is reinterpreted as Rama ಮತ್ತು ಸೀತೆ ಪರಸ್ಪರ ಛಾಯೆಯಾಗಿದ್ದರು, then things would be interesting. And that is how we got to somehow help people work out their marriages, because we are dealing with language here. People of course talk about soft skills, people talk about communication skills, business communication, many things. So all these things of course zeroing on something called languaging. So it's a very serious act. It's a very serious act which is supposed to produce serious meanings. And here, if we kind of in public speak like this, that is, a woman has got to be a shadow to her husband, considering the kind of age we are living in where people have become aware of certain loopholes in our society, they would question us, they would condemn us, and moreover, they would find our talk to be extremely uninteresting because we are only reciprocating to the old school of thought. And here, when we sensitize our students to the nuances of language, we have to somehow help them to understand their social surroundings properly, because they would be exposed to certain kind of exploitation, caste exploitation, gender exploitation, social inequality, and whatever we are talking about in terms of ideology. All these things are very much implicit in the language that is used in the surroundings. And if students are quite conscious about the use of language, they would definitely be in a comfortable position to understand their social surroundings and also respond to the surroundings powerfully. Otherwise, they will only be obedient people who simply listen, because communication cannot be understood as one person talking and the other person listening. That can happen only on online lectures. But when it is real society, it should be two-way. And two-way communication can happen when students understand language clearly. Because we also do a lot of cultural studies in the classroom. So cultural studies is all about understanding language. And cultural studies is also about using language to get meanings out of several other semiotic resources. For example, if a student comes across an advertisement which says buy two, get two, and in order to emphasize that, if the advertisement has a picture of two girls, it looks pretty attractive because it's the picture of two beautiful girls. But the meaning he has to get out of it should of course border on his understanding of gender disparity. And this thing can happen only when the teacher inside the classroom has sensitized the students to several levels of meanings that are hidden beneath the sentences. because no meaning can be easily conspicuous. All meanings will of course be hidden, and it's only through certain exploration of language that we can arrive at different levels of meanings. And that can happen only when there is a teacher inside the classroom who keeps doing it. It's like a teacher who is not only a good teacher, but who is also a good writer. Whenever he goes into the classroom, he shares with the students his write-ups. Just assume this. This will definitely become part of the thinking of his students as well. Because here is one person who not only reads a lot, but writes a lot. And he shares his write-ups with all of us. And this would definitely become part of their thinking, so much that maybe in about 2 weeks or 2 months' time, 1 or 2 students would come to you to share with his write-up, because you have shared with him a very interesting culture. And that is exactly what we have to do here, because when a class happens, preparation has to be so serious from our side that we need to go there with a lot of resolution that I'll help my students to understand not just the meaning that is apparently visible in the language, but I would rather want to help them to explore the language so that they'll know that languaging is a powerful activity. Of course, it cannot happen in an overnight's time, and you will of course be dealing with degree students, and there will be other associated issues wherein students may not take classes seriously. But seriousness would definitely become part of their thinking when the teacher is serious. If we mind our business inside the classroom, being punctual and being committed to our classes, the students would definitely follow suit. And we cannot really empower 100% attendance there. We can at least do some bit, at least for a few of them who would show some interest. So that is where we can definitely bring in a lot of change, and that is what transformation means through our classes. When we teach language education, to go by this old school methodology, people talk about LSRW. Look at the chronology. First comes L, listening. So students listen to us. And when an English teacher speaks good English, the student is fortunate enough to be exposed to good English, and he would learn good English. But if the person on the stage is quite comfortable only using the regional language, then the first component of language education would collapse, because listening is not happening for our students. They cannot definitely learn the language because the speaker himself is not using it. And we cannot expect our students, especially in India, who hail from rural background, to learn some English from their parents. That can happen only in Bangalore, where students go to some premier colleges where their parents would also use a lot of English at home, and English would definitely not be a problem for them. I had one classmate in MA who in fact had said in the open class that English was her mother tongue. She was so confident in saying that she actually argued with our teacher to claim that English was her mother tongue. But here in state universities and government colleges, we cannot expect students to be that confident about their English language, and they depend heavily on what happens inside the classroom. And at least here, in about 50 minutes time, let us make sure that the first component of language education, LSRWL, serves the purpose. So let them be exposed to some proper English, good English, chaste English, and make sure that you give them at least 5 to 10 different words every time you go to the class. And here you are serving a very important purpose of building their vocabulary. In case you are using some new words all the time you are inside the classroom, they not only will have a lot of respect for you, but in the meanwhile, in your future classes, they'll look forward to getting more words from you, and you'll become definitely a kind of an encyclopedia of vocabulary. So L is very important. And S part has not been a very successful component in many parts of India, because students don't find themselves to be comfortable in using English language. Fine, let's not worry about English language. What matters to us here is, because we are dealing with language education, let us make sure that they at least use their mother tongue effectively. In case they know that mother tongue, when it is used in public, has to be different from how they use it at home, then we have served the purpose. It's not that they have to be comfortable only in English. They should, of course, be very comfortable basically in their mother tongue when they use it for official purposes. Even when they send SMS to their teachers, or when they make phone calls to their teachers, when they engage in talking to their teachers in their mother tongue, let them understand that using even the mother tongue is taken seriously, because you cannot use it like how you use at home. There's, of course, a huge amount of difference between official language and your daily language. And when it comes to English language, there's another very important responsibility that we have to shoulder: ordinary language and literary language. And once the students are able to distinguish between the ordinary language and the literary language, that will definitely be a huge feedback for all of us. Because students should know that language serves different purposes at different levels in different places. It's not the same everywhere. I'll give you an example. Assume your principal is looking for you and he asks for you. And in case he asks for you in Kannada, ಅವನೆಲ್ಲಿ ಹಾಳಾಗೋಗಿದ್ದಾನೆ ನೋಡು, how will you take it? And this is not out of imagination. I am sharing this example with you. This is part of my experience in some place. And you cannot ignore this, nor can you be scared about this, because he's in the position of authority. He can use the language like however you can. And most often people attribute this kind of language to the culture of the speaker. He comes from such culture. Normally people from his place use language like that. Language is, of course, a cultural act, but not a barbaric act. Languaging itself is a different culture. And here you use it for a very important purpose of connecting to people. And when you are there in that position of power, your language has got to be not only chaste, but it has to be humble, dignified, and in the meantime, respectful. If your language doesn't serve these purposes, then there is some problem with your foundational education. And here we are, as teachers of English language, responsible for shaping up the minds of our students so that they'll understand that making use of a language is a very serious activity where their identity will be immediately formed every time they use the language in public. So speaking, when it comes to the second component in LSRW, is of course a very significant component, and we have to help our students to use even their mother tongue with a lot of dignity. And I give a lot of scope for art, reading. For internal assessment, we think about making students make presentations. Let's not worry about presentations. How many teachers are comfortable in making presentations? Forget the students. Extemporizing something for about 10 minutes is not an easy act. And even to stand before certain people is not really an easy act, and you are dealing with students who would have just completed their PUC, and there would be a lot of anxieties in their minds. And here is one teacher who suddenly points out one student and asks him or her to come to the stage to make a presentation. It's not going to be an easy act for students. Instead, we can use this particular activity for reading aloud activities. If we help the students to read aloud in public, that will give them a lot of confidence about being exposed to English language. And it will also be a significant exercise to their tongues to use English more effectively. And they also know that they sound pretty well in public. And reading aloud activity should be a launching pad for the students to later make presentations. Because reading, like how it seems to be, is not an easy act. In MA, there was one teacher called Satyanarayan. He would make us read passages from R.K. Narayan's novel, The Guide. There was one guy who was sitting beside me, who was reading a short passage from the novel. For muzzle, he read it as muscle. See, it's not really a punishable crime. And you are dealing with a student who has no such exposure to English language, and even though he has done BA, taking optional English as one of his optionals, still we cannot expect the students to have gathered all possible information about English language. There will certainly be certain unknown areas in the huge territory called English language. The moment he pronounced the word as muscle, some of us laughed. He was my close friend in BA, and we had spent some good time in BA. And because of that error at that moment from my side, I lost this friendship. And here, when it is a reading activity, people will be conscious, and there will be a lot of fear in them because they are being heard by others. And if it is an activity in the degree level itself, then when they come to PG, they would be very comfortable to make presentations, because languaging, if they understand it pretty seriously at degree level, finding jobs will not be a problem, because unemployment, like how we know, is not really a problem. People are unemployable. That is the problem. We have a lot of degree students coming out in our own university. The results are pretty okay. Students are coming out in large numbers, but the problem is when it is NAC inspection or any other inspection, when we have to tell people outside about employability rate, we have issues. Because pass percentage appears to be pretty laudable, but as compared to that, employability rate seems to be extremely poor. And this is purely because of just one simple lacuna in all our students, that is, they cannot language powerfully. Self-expression is not happening. And it's not happening because they've never done it. And this has to, of course, start happening only if teachers make up their minds to initiate the students to this reading activity at the degree level seriously. And W, the last component, is unthinkable for now, because we are not dealing with students who have to become writers. We are only helping them to somehow use the language to a minimum extent where they can definitely produce certain intended meanings. But in case there are students who evince interest in writing, that has to start happening first with this official communication with us. Students should, of course, be very comfortable in communicating with us in writing as well. And if this happens, then our language education is not only successful, but very contributory. Next thing I want to talk to you about is shifts in reading. Shifts in reading. When we teach language, when students get language skills from us, and when they do some reading on their own, they should do the reading activity at different levels. Skimming, scanning, and if they can do some skimming and only to get certain amount of smattering of the text that they are reading, then our English classes will become more interesting for them. For example, if we give them some assignment, we ask a student to come prepared for a short an internal assessment test. And if it is 3 or 4 essays at a stretch, the students should, of course, be empowered enough to do the reading in quick time. This is called skimming, meaning the moment they run their eyes across the pages of their texts, something should go in. And this, of course, cannot happen in an overnight's time, but they should know that they should arrive at that position. Because to again give you an MA experience, I had classmates who would read close to 250 pages a day. Seriously. And reading 250 pages in a single day, in fact, is quite a huge, daunting task for all of us. But some students would do it quite comfortably in my class. And it was not really a task for them to really worry about. And some novels would be read out in about a single day. And the next day they would come prepared for discussion. And this is the level that I'm talking about. Students should know how to do this skimming and scanning. And when they read, they should know that the reading should have helped them gather not just the grid of the text, but it should also leave behind some questions in their minds. And if they do this kind of reading at degree level, maybe our English classes would have contributed significantly to them. And in our English classes, pragmatics of written language become extremely important. When we do this writing work for different purposes, students should distinguish between ordinary language and literary language. I made a beginning by way of talking about certain consciousness about social surroundings that they should gather from the understanding of language. And I'm reiterating the same now when it is the pragmatics of written language. When they do this writing work, if they are doing some ordinary writing, they should know what vocabulary is needed. And when they want to sound very creative, they should know what vocabulary has to be used. If we help students to arrive at this position where they can choose words for their convenience, then our English classes are extremely satisfactory. I said something about the semiotics of language. What I mean by semiotics of language here is, or semiotic study of languages. Many times, students become victims of harassment and exploitation, sexually as well. And this exploitation happens, of course, from their neighbors, people at home, and unfortunately at times in classrooms too. They can definitely evade or be away from such exploitation if they can manage to understand the language that is being used. Somebody compliments a girl, "You're looking good." That can definitely be inoffensive. A student of mine had once told his friend that she looked like chicken leg piece. And she had liked the compliment. When I got to know about it in one of my gender and literature classes, I had to interpret that compliment for her. She must have definitely done it with no such cross purpose. But being a girl at this level, you ought to know that language carries meanings. And he's comparing you to a leg piece. So you're a consumable. And we've actually talked about this in gender classes a lot, that a woman in fact is subjected to a lot of exploitation because she's been treated more as a consumable. And here is one student who is your classmate who compliments you, calling you a leg piece, and you like it. So unfortunate it is that you didn't get the actual meaning that was implicit in that compliment, and the guy who complimented you may not have intended to hurt you, but unfortunately he came up with a wrong metaphor, and that wrong comparison leads to a lot of problems. And here students, if they are sensitized enough to these nuances of language, maybe things could be pretty okay for them. And I think that's it